Hi, I thought today we'd have a little bit of fun with just a little project, a little poppy brooch. I'm wearing one here. I thought that was kind of a fun way to use up maybe some little leftovers. Perhaps we want to make a poppy type flower for some reason or other. So this was just a fun little project that I thought we might all enjoy. So I've gone ahead, I've done a little pattern. This pattern is free to download from the GourmetQuilter.com. So you can go ahead and grab the pattern so that you can make yourself a whole string of poppies if that's what you'd like to do. So I've got one half made here so that I can show you as we're going as well. But on the pattern sheet you'll find that there's a shape for a petal here. We need to trace that shape. So the shape for the petal, the actual outline is the actual stitching line. So not a cutting line. We're going to stitch on that line. So, and then there's a circle here because we're putting a circle of. I'm using a piece of wool felt behind. It doesn't have to be. It can just be something, just to hold it together on the back side. And then maybe an approximately 1 inch button to go in the centre. So that's what that's there for. So what I'm suggesting we do is trace this petal shape onto our fabric. Now trace it onto the wrong side of the fabric. So this is the shape that we want. This edge here we're leaving open. So if you've got a straight piece of fabric, maybe a strip already, you can already just put that line along there because we don't need to change that. But what we do need to do is be able to see it. So I can see through that there. You just need a light source. If you've got a light box, that's great. If you haven't, you've probably got a window, or you might have a glass top table with a little lamp under it. Any number of reasons. Or you could just draw your petal shape, of course. You might be that capable. So I'm just going to draw another one. Now when you draw them, leave a little bit of a gap between because we're sewing on that line, but we've still got to cut them out. So not too much, no more than ½ an inch. We're going to be cutting fairly small seam allowance, so maybe even ¼ an inch is enough because we're going to be cutting about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance around after we've sewn. Don't cut them out yet, we're going to sew them first. So I've gone ahead and I've traced my shapes onto my fabric there. So now I just need to have my fabric. So that's tracing onto the wrong side of your fabric so that the right sides will be together when we stitch them. Now I don't need this length, this was a strip that I had. I'm using a few little bits and pieces. I've already traced a couple onto a slightly different colour leftover that I had. So the stitching around now on the line is relatively straightforward. We just want to start. So we're starting at the straight edge and we're going to just stitch right on that line. So I have made my stitch length just slightly shorter than usual because of cutting a small seam allowance. So maybe about 2.2, 2.3 on a Bonina. I'm not sure what the other machines do. And you just probably want to have your needle down so that you can keep turning. If you've got a knee lift, that's good. I haven't got mine here today. But just turn around to go around that curve. And really, it's that simple. So you've got to do that for 5 petals to make the poppy as I've made mine here. So I think you can go ahead, I'll go ahead and I can sew the rest of my petals and I'll come back and show you what to do with them next. So I've gone ahead and I've stitched all my 5 petal shapes. I've actually already cut some out, but I just thought I'd show you. You probably can't see the seam line particularly, but I'm just cutting approximately 1/8 of an inch away, no less than 1/8. It could be slightly more, but not as much as 1/4 of an inch. Because we're cutting on a curve, we don't want too much bulk there. We want it to turn nicely and sit comfortably inside. So it's a matter of just cutting just a little bit away from that seam. As I said, maybe 1/8 of an inch. Because they're sewn right sides together. So we're going to turn them right side out now, and we're going to press that petal shape. So it won't really matter too much if your petal shape's just a little bit wonky because we gather them up in the centre and it just makes for a nice little petal shape. I love red poppies. Not all poppies are red, I do realise that. You could make them in all sorts of colours. You could even make them in different sizes. So it's a matter of just turning it out, and then if you've got some sort of a turning tool or a pencil handy, I suggest that you just run that around the actual seam line because that helps it sit nicely when you're going to press it. So I've actually gone ahead and pressed enough other ones. I don't need to do that one just now. So I've got myself 5 petals here. Now I've got a slight variation in colour because I'm using bits and pieces. So I'm just going to make sure that they alternate in between, but I'm going to go to the sewing machine now to gather them. Now you could do this bit by hand with a little running stitch because we're going to gather them into a little circle and pull them up, but I'm going to use a elongated stitch on the machine. So I've taken the stitch up as large as it will go on this machine. It's up to size 6. Normally it's on 2.5, so it's quite large. You want to leave yourself some tail of thread because you're going to need it to pull up for the gathering, and you don't want to have a locking stitch when you start because you need to be able to pull into the stitching. And then I'm just using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm just going to chain these through. So I get in there, and then I can start feeding the next one and just keep stitching through with that super large stitch, one after the other. As I said, leave that tail at the beginning, don't lock it off, because then you can't pull it up. And then make sure you leave a tail when you pull it out as well, so because you need a tail at both ends. So that with that large stitch, it probably won't pull it in very much on a fine fabric. That would just pull it in as you go. And so you just want to find the top thread of both ends, because they're the ones that we're going to pull up. It should be the same thread like the top one or the bottom one, but probably the top one will pull up pretty well. And just gradually pull that in. So just do it, don't sort of yank at it because your thread just might break because we're working with a double thickness fabric here. So pull that right in until you've got it nice and firm into a tight little circle as you can get it, and then we can tie those ends off. So that's coming up pretty tight there. Let's go a little bit tighter maybe, and then I can just start tying those. So the two ends that we've put of thread that we've pulled up. Another thought would be that you could put a slightly stronger thread in your machine to do this sort of gathering work as well, if you're going to use your machine. But I'm just going to pull those up fairly tight. You can see it's coming in quite nicely there, and I just need to tie that off. So I just need to get my fingers out of the way that have wrapped themselves in thread, and just make a knot in there so that that's just tied off sufficiently to hold it. It's not going to have to be the only holding because we're going to stitch it onto the piece of wool felt or whatever it is that you're putting behind. So that's tied up quite nicely there. We'll just leave those threads at the moment hanging around because we can trim them off afterwards. So that's quite good like that. I've just got a circle, as I said, it's a piece of wool felt. It could be anything that you're stitching to, even probably a piece of cardboard would work. And you just want to centre that as reasonably well as you can. Make sure that you're happy with the arrangement with the petals. You may want to stick a couple of pins in, or you may not, just so that it sits somewhere where you want it to. Have a little look at the petal arrangement, and then we're going to go back to the machine and just take it back to its normal stitch length. And then just stitch that to the piece of felt. Again, this doesn't really show, so it's not particularly essential that it be amazing stitching at this stage. And I'll let my needle down and just go around that little circle in the middle there, just to hold it all together. So this is all going to be covered up with a large button. Now I'm just using a regular button because I have some. It's approximately a 1-inch button, it says in the pattern, but you might have some covered buttons, or you might want to do something else in the centre. But now that I've done all that, I can trim all these threads away that are just going to be in our way. And I've just got to sew the button on. Now you can sew the button on by machine, but I'm actually going to sew mine on by hand today. And we've just about made our little poppy. So I've got myself a nice button here that sits pretty well in the centre there. So I'm just going to have a needle and thread, which I have absolutely sitting here, and I'll go ahead and I'll just stitch that on, and then I can show you how we might put a fastening on the back as well. So I've gone ahead, I've sewn my buttons on 2 poppies actually, and they're looking pretty cute. The back of them isn't amazing because it's not generally meant to be seen. You could put poppies back to back if you wanted to have something else going on, or little double ones. You could make a whole string of them, you could make a garland, you could use them for little gift wraps, you could do any number of things with these poppies. If you're going to wear it as a brooch, as I have suggested, you might just use a safety pin. That's all I've done with this one here, is because it's got that nice felt backing on it, I can pin into that as I pin it on. The other option would be if you wanted something not quite so temporary or safety pin looking, although still with a safety pin, unless you happen to have a brooch back that you can sew on. You can sew the safety pin on. So if you sew the side that doesn't open, you can actually over sew that to your back piece of felt, and then it will be there and it's ready for you to just pin on as you would normally, rather than having to turn through quite in that same way. So you can create your own brooch back by just over sewing the side that doesn't open on your safety pin. You could make the safety pin the size you want it to be, all sorts of things. Or you may have a regular brooch back, or you may not be making a brooch at all. So that was the poppy brooch. Please enjoy it. Please go to GourmetQuilter.com to be able to get your pattern. It's a free download, and please share it with your friends, but please do not use it commercially. But thank you so much.